Okay, hi. So we'll see how this live video goes. I am having trouble with my Wi-Fi, so ask me anything yoga, take two. So I have some questions in advance, and also you are welcome to submit your own yoga questions and just pop them in the comments below, and hopefully my Wi-Fi will hang in there so that we can actually do this thing. So I've got some notes over to my side over here, which is why I keep looking over to the window over there. So yeah, I have some questions in advance, and just before my signal dropped off, Robert was asking about Pigeon Pose. So where does your front leg go in Pigeon Pose to get the best stretch and without injury? And my answer to that is it depends. So having the knee kind of forward of the hip with the shin kind of tucked in towards the body is generally a pretty good place to start, because that's going to have the least amount of leverage on the joint. And then you can work your way towards taking the knee further out to the side and the shin more parallel to the front of the mat. So that will give you more leverage for the rotation of the hip and therefore more stretch on the outside of the glutes. So that being said, I'm not like a huge fan of that pose so much anymore because of that strong leverage on the joint. And when you add in that forward bend, there's a lot of compression on the front of the hip flexor. And so in my opinion, I think it's better in general to do that pose flipped over on your back in like a figure 4 position. So if you lay on your back with your ankle on your knee and then picking the bottom foot off the floor, that I think is a better way to get that stretch around the outside of the hip with way less risk to that joint. And yeah, so that's my opinion on that one. So I have some more questions that people sent me in advance. So one that has come up a couple times recently, most recently when I was working with a client one-on-one, she was asking about downward facing dog. And for one, like, I feel like even though yoga teachers like to tell you that downward facing dog is a resting pose, that is a lie. It is hard. So if you find it hard, then yeah, you're probably right. And I made a special chart for you guys. So you can see here, there are 2 really common assists in downward facing dog, and both of them have the same direction, where either your yoga teacher is kind of standing with one foot between your hands and pressing on your hip bones or sacrum up so that your butt goes up more towards the sky, or your teacher's behind you towards your feet and kind of bear hugs around your hips. And same deal, like the direction is pulling the hips up and back. So people have a lot of questions about that assist because it often feels pretty good because of that upward direction that your teacher's assisting your hips up and back. That is facilitating that traction in your spine so that your spine gets nice and long. And it relieves the pressure off of your hands, which if you're in a vinyasa class and you've done like 1,000 sun salutations, probably your hands and wrists and shoulders are all getting really fatigued from doing all of those sun salutations and resting in downward facing dog. So the question is often like, how do I do that at home? And the answer is you can't really. I mean, you could if you set up your downward facing dog with like an elaborate strap system around a doorknob. You can actually kind of loop your strap around a doorknob and then take the other end of the strap underneath your hips, and that will give you the same effect. You can give yourself traction in that way using a strap, but there's nothing that you can do physically. Like, you can't press with your hands more, you can't pull with your legs more to do that for yourself. And that's not like, there's nothing wrong with the way that you're doing downward facing dog. It's just a thing that a lot of yoga teachers are taught how to do to make that pose maybe feel better for people. So, and yeah, so that is what it is. There's nothing wrong with your downward facing dog when a yoga teacher does that assist for you. It is just facilitating that long spine. And really that's like the main purpose of downward facing dog. It's not a resting pose. The main purpose of downward facing dog is to practice that length in the spine. So when you're in downward facing dog, you're working towards keeping the natural curve in both your lower back and your upper back. So, and I wanted to add in the other assist that I sometimes see, fortunately I don't see it quite so much anymore, is this one with the pink X and the sad face with my glittery highlighter. So sometimes teachers will come up between your hands and then press on the upper back, and that is no bueno. Sad face. So what happens then, I don't know why someone might do that, except that they might see like a round in the upper back and try to like push it flat. But what that will cause is a lot of unnecessary strain on the front and the shoulder. And it is, you put your people at a really high risk of injury if you do that. So no pushy on the shoulders. But these guys are okay. That's fine. So that's downward facing dog. Another thing that I hear quite a lot is people have heard that yoga is good for back pain, and that is true. Yay. But I feel like that is like such a vague and general guideline. Okay, yoga is great for back pain, like, so what? Then I will sometimes, when I was teaching a lot of vinyasa classes, I would have somebody that had never done any yoga before hear that, you know, my doctor said I should do yoga, my back hurts. And the very first class is a heated vinyasa class. I'm like, I don't really think that's what your doctor meant. It's really athletic and fast. Might help some people, but in general, it might not be the best place to start. In fact, Vini Yoga, they did a study with the National Institute of Health a couple years ago. And in the NIH study, showed that 78% of the practitioners experienced significant reduction in low back pain after 12 weeks of practice. And that's pretty remarkable. And why that works, why Vini Yoga in particular is helpful for back pain, and it's been really helpful for me personally for back pain, is there is this practice of PNF, which is proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation. And so what that means basically is it's the repetitive contracting and stretching of muscles, and that will help encourage tight muscles to relax. And also another thing that Vini Yoga is great at is it is excellent at helping to do neuromuscular re-education. And so a lot of back pain is caused by poor posture problems. And when you are practicing Vini Yoga, there's a really strong emphasis on the relationship between breath and movement. And so using the breath to move the body with a really concentrated awareness, that will help teach you how to move in a more beneficial way and how to hold your posture in a more healthy way. And so all of those things together will help reduce back pain. In my own experience also, I've had a lot of people come to yin yoga classes that have been really benefited for that for low back pain. I think it's the combination of the really long holds can really help deeply stretch the muscles and the connective tissue along the sides of the back, like the muscles on the sides of the back. And in addition to that, I think like the long moments of quiet really help people get in a better mental state and a better mood. So there's also been studies about back pain where it's oftentimes like a cycle. And so you'll have the back pain, and then you aren't doing the things that you like to do because your back hurts, you're afraid of hurting it. Then because you're not doing the things that you like to do, you start to feel depressed and sad and worried and have an existential crisis, like, what is going to happen to me? I can't do the things I like anymore. And those bad feelings cause the pain to get worse. And so if you can break that cycle anywhere along the cycle, you can reverse it. So you can say, you know what? No, like, I'm not going to feel bad forever. I think I can feel better one day. I can find some hope in this situation. I'm not going to let this stop me. I'm going to start trying to do things that I like. And because you start to move more, then you start to hurt less. Then your back stops hurting. Then your mood improves. And so you can break the cycle any way around. And I think a yin practice that has an element of meditation in it can also help with back pain. So those Vini Yoga, Yin Yoga are both really great places to start in a yoga practice if you are experiencing back pain. Let's see what other questions we got here. So I have more stick figures for you. The next one is a question about some tips about how to get into bridge pose. So I drew this one out for you guys also. So depending on your school of yoga, bridge pose is often done laying on your back with the knees bent, the hips lift up, and a lot of times I see the hands are clasped together underneath, and that also kind of gives you a little bit more leverage to get your hips up. So in addition, my second favorite answer to things other than it depends is okay, why? So what's important about bridge pose? Why would you want to do it? So my answer to that question is that it's a great way to practice strengthening the glutes, the hamstrings, the back of the legs, and as you do that, you also start to stretch the hip flexors and the front of the chest. There's a little bit of flexion in the upper back and neck. So, okay, so if that's what you want to do, and maybe if you're not able to lift all the way up, some other ways to strengthen around the glutes and the hamstrings are practicing standing movements like squats, lunges. Those will help strengthen the muscles of the legs. And then for that arm position where your hands are clasped underneath of you, doing some movements that practice external rotation where your arm goes out to the side and up to mobilize around the shoulder, that will help practicing the external rotation for getting your arms in that bound position. You can practice that bind doing standing poses too, so that you can practice that without having to leverage against the floor. So that's some places to start with that one. And then I have a lot of ideas about experimenting with this pose. So in Vini Yoga, this thing is a movement, and it's called Dvipada Pitam. And so you start with this foundation with your knees bent and your feet on the floor. And usually you inhale to lift the hips up and you exhale and come back down. So anytime you're working towards one of these static shapes, I recommend finding a way to make it dynamic first. And that will help strengthen the required muscles for the holding part. So a lot, working on more repetitions of coming in and out, and then little by little working on staying up there longer is a good way to build towards doing those poses. And it's totally fine if, when you're starting off with this one, if your hips don't get very high up off the floor. It's no thing. The other thing, Oh, I realize now that this is totally backwards. It's not going to help you probably, but I will read it to you. So it says experiment, and to experiment with your foot position and to move on exhale instead of inhale. And so like that sort of fitness bridge position is a thing that's practiced in like group exercise classes and Pilates. And in those kinds of practices, it's more common to move on an exhale because that is where the effort in that one is. So you can try also, instead of moving on inhale to lift your hips up, try moving on exhale. And that can help engage your core more and give you the strength, a little extra strength to lift up in that position. So you can try moving on exhale instead of inhale. And when I say experiment with the foot position in this one, you can move your feet more forward, so you can move them further away from your hips, that away. And that will put a little less strain on your knee. And so if you feel like you're restricted in your movement in that one because your knees bother you, try your feet just maybe 2 or 3 inches further away from your hips and see if that gives you a little bit more room and a little less pressure on your knees. And then in addition to the forward and back position of your feet, you can also experiment with how wide your feet are. And so for most people, feet together is the most challenging position. And then feet hip width apart, right at the bony part of your hips, that is kind of like the most traditional position. But you know, everybody's femur bones connect to their hips at a slightly different angle. And one of the things that you might try is widening your feet. And that could give you a little bit more stable foundation to lift up a little bit higher. And that will also exercise the muscles on the outside of the hips a little bit more strongly. So I would say in general, most people are more comfortable with feet just a little bit wider than hip width apart to do those bridge lifts. And then if you go like wider than that, like more like shoulder width or mat width, then is where you get more into working the outer hips more. So like all of them are good. They'll just do different things, and you can find, you know, with some trial and error, what is the best position for you. And you might, you know, mix it up some of the times. There's like 1,000 zillion different variations of this, Dvipadapitam, as we call it in Vini Yoga. So there's stuff you can do with your arms, and it's a good one. It's fun. Let's see what else we got. Oh, this is a good one. What do yoga teachers do while you're in Shavasana? So if I'm teaching a group class especially, what I'm doing when people are in Shavasana is I'm just making sure that people are okay. And so I used to teach at a gym, like a big fitness club. And so when we're in Shavasana, the big thing that I did was watch the doors. So people would sometimes like come like barging into the studio, not aware that we're in class. And some of the time there would be somebody from the child care center that would need to hold up a sign for somebody that needed to get their kid. So those are some very practical things. They're just kind of taking care of the space to make sure that people can rest comfortably without being interrupted or being disturbed. So that's a big part of my Shavasana job. And I'm also just watching to make sure that people are okay. So if somebody is looking really fidgety or uncomfortable, I can check on them and bring them a prop or something. And I'm also just kind of watching to see when it's time for people to come out of Shavasana. So if everybody starts like falling asleep, or if everybody starts to get like a little bit twitchy and wiggly, then it's probably time to get out of there. And so I'm just paying attention to see when it's time to pull people out of Shavasana, just making sure everybody's okay. The other thing I do when I was teaching a lot of group classes is I have to count people. So this isn't the case for every yoga studio or every yoga class, but I had to count my students, and Shavasana was my time to count the students too. So we're like, well, how many people? That usually took me a little time because there was less count. So mostly during Shavasana, I'm just making sure you guys are okay. So yeah, I plan to do these Ask Me Anything yogas about once a month. So if you have any questions, just send me a message and I'm happy to chat with you. You can even drop a comment below and I will see it and answer any questions you might have. And as a thank you for sticking around to watch the video, you can use the discount code THANKSINVITE, all one word, all caps, to get a discount, 10% discount for any booking on my website. So I offer one-on-one yoga classes via Skype, like we're doing right here in my office. It'll be much like this. I also offer one-on-one sessions at Catonsville Counseling and Wellness in Catonsville, Maryland. It's a beautiful little space. And the other thing that I offer in addition to ongoing one-on-one classes where I would, talk with you first and then guide you through, like a 30 or so minute practice. The other thing that I do is I help custom design yoga practices. And so we'd have a discussion, a consultation like this, take maybe at least 30 or 40 minutes just to talk about what your goals are for a yoga practice. I'll show you a couple ideas and then I send you off with a big sheet of stick figures like this with notes so that you can do your practice on your own. So it's really a passion of mine to help empower people to do their own yoga practice. If you ever have any questions about doing yoga, just let me know and I am here for you. So THANKSINVITE is the discount code. You can prepay for a one-on-one session, or you can use that towards a belly dance class if you want to take a belly dance class, and then prepay, and then we'll set up a time to meet either in person or via Skype. So can see all of the things that I offer if you go to my website, www.omchantress.com. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you later. Bye!